It was a warm summer night when Sara drove down the dirt road that led to her small town in rural America. She had been visiting her friends in the city and decided to take a shortcut home to surprise her family. But as she drove down the road, her car suddenly stalled, leaving her stranded in the dark. She tried to start the car several times, but it wouldn't budge. Sara got out of the car and checked her phone, but there was no signal. She felt a sudden sense of unease as she looked around, feeling like she was being watched. She tried to shake it off, thinking it was just her imagination, and started to walk down the road, hoping to find some help. As she walked, Sara realized that she didn't recognize the area. She had never been down this road before, and it seemed to stretch on endlessly. She started to panic as she walked, feeling like she was getting further and further away from civilization. That's when she heard a sound that made her heart race. It was a low growling noise that seemed to be getting closer. Sara turned around to see a figure emerging from the darkness. It was a man, tall and muscular, with a menacing look in his eyes. She tried to run, but he caught up to her quickly, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her back. Sara struggled, but the man was too strong. He forced her into a nearby field, where he proceeded to rape and kill her. The next day, Sara's family reported her missing to the authorities. They organized search parties, scoured the area, and put up flyers, but Sara was nowhere to be found. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. As the days passed, the police began to uncover strange things about the dirt road and the surrounding area. They found that several people had gone missing over the years while driving down that road. The locals had always whispered about strange occurrences in the area, but no one had ever been able to prove anything. As the investigation deepened, the police found evidence that the man who had killed Sara was not acting alone. There was a whole network of criminals who had been operating in the area for years, kidnapping and killing young women who drove down that dirt road. They were never caught, and to this day, Sara's family still searches for her, haunted by the dark secrets that surround her disappearance. Days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months. Sara's family never gave up hope of finding her alive, but as time went on, their hope turned into despair. The investigation into her disappearance had hit a dead end, and the case had gone cold. But one night, Sara's mother had a dream. In the dream, she saw Sara walking towards her, smiling. She knew it was just a dream, but it gave her hope. The next day, Sara's mother woke up with a renewed sense of determination. She decided to hire a private investigator to look into the case further. The private investigator started by retracing Sara's steps. He drove down the dirt road where she had disappeared and talked to locals who lived in the area. It didn't take him long to uncover some disturbing information. The locals told him about strange sightings they had seen along the dirt road over the years. They spoke of a tall, muscular man who was always lurking in the shadows, watching anyone who drove down the road. They told the investigator about the growling noise that could be heard on quiet nights and the unsettling feeling of being watched. The investigator also found evidence of strange rituals that had taken place in the area. He found burnt offerings and markings on the trees, suggesting that something sinister was at work in the surrounding forest. It was as if the dirt road and the forest had a life of their own, drawing in unsuspecting victims to their doom. The private investigator eventually stumbled upon a lead. He found a witness who had seen a group of men dragging a woman into the forest on the night of Sara's disappearance. The witness had been too scared to come forward, but with the investigator's persistence, they finally revealed what they had seen. The private investigator and the police followed the lead, and it led them to a small cabin deep in the forest. When they arrived, they found evidence of the ritualistic killings that had been taking place in the area. They found Sara's belongings and the belongings of several other missing women. But the men who had committed the crimes were long gone. They had fled the area, leaving behind a trail of destruction and death. The police and a private investigator searched for them, but they were never found. Sara's family finally had closure, but the horror of what had happened to their daughter haunted them for the rest of their lives. The dirt road and the forest had claimed yet another victim, and the darkness that lurked there would never be fully understood. It was a warm summer evening, and 4 friends were driving home from a day trip to the lake. As they passed through the countryside, they decided to take a detour down a dirt road. As they drove, the road became narrower, and the trees loomed closer. Eventually, they came across an old wooden sign, barely visible in the fading light. It read, Gallagher Farmhouse, established 1912. The friends were intrigued and decided to explore the property. They parked the car and walked towards the house, which was surrounded by tall grass and weeds. The house itself was dilapidated, with peeling paint and broken windows. As they stepped inside, they could smell the musty odor of decay. The house was empty, with no furniture, but it was clear someone had been there recently. There were signs of recent habitation, including dirty dishes and half-eaten food. Despite the ominous atmosphere, the friends continued to explore the house. They made their way to the second floor, where they found a locked room. After some effort, they managed to break the lock and enter the room. What they saw inside made their blood run cold. The walls were covered in grotesque paintings and scribbled words. The furniture was overturned, and the floor was covered in dirt and grime. It was clear that someone had been using the room for some sort of ritualistic activity. Feeling disturbed and on edge, the friends decided to leave. As they walked out, they could feel a sense of unease and the feeling that they were being watched. Little did they know, they were not alone on the property. As the friends made their way back towards the car, they heard rustling in the bushes nearby. They stopped in their tracks, staring at the area where the noise had come from. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the bushes. It was a man, wild-eyed and disheveled, wearing ragged clothes. He stumbled towards the group, muttering incomprehensible words. The friends backed away slowly, but the man continued to approach them. Before they could react, a group of similarly deranged individuals emerged from the shadows. They were armed with makeshift weapons, including knives and clubs. The friends knew they had to run. They sprinted towards their car, but it was too late. The group of crazed individuals had caught up to them, and they were surrounded. The friends fought back, but they were outnumbered and outmatched. One by one, they were subdued and dragged away, screaming for help. They were taken back to the farmhouse, where they were thrown into a makeshift cell in the basement. The friends were trapped, with no way to escape. They could hear the sounds of their captors moving around upstairs, murmuring in hushed tones. They knew they were in grave danger. As the night wore on, the friends huddled together, praying for a way out. They could hear strange noises coming from the room above them, moans, groans, and the sound of a low guttural chant. Suddenly, they heard footsteps approaching the basement door. The door creaked open, and a beam of light illuminated their faces. Standing in the doorway was the leader of the group, a tall, menacing figure with a crazed look in his eyes. He stepped into the room, holding a knife in one hand. The friends screamed, knowing what was about to happen, but they were powerless to stop him. The leader raised the knife, and the room fell silent. Just as the leader was about to strike, a loud crash echoed throughout the house. The leader turned towards the noise, distracted. The friends took this opportunity to overpower him and escape their cell. As they made their way through the dark, dusty basement, they stumbled upon a room filled with disturbing artifacts, animal carcasses, blood-stained clothing, and various other sinister items. Suddenly, they heard footsteps coming down the stairs. They quickly hid behind a pile of crates, waiting for their pursuers to pass. But as they peered through the slats of the crates, they saw something that made their blood run cold. The group of crazed individuals was not alone. There were more of them, men, women, and even children, all wearing tattered clothing and covered in dirt and grime. They were chanting in unison, their eyes fixed on a large blood-stained altar in the center of the room. The friends knew they had to get out of there, and fast. They made their way back upstairs, moving quietly to avoid detection. But as they reached the front door, they heard footsteps behind them. They turned around to see the group of crazed individuals standing in the doorway, blocking their escape. The leader stepped forward, holding a bloody knife in his hand. He looked at the friends with a crazed expression, his eyes filled with hatred and malice. Suddenly, the door behind the group burst open, and a group of police officers stormed into the house. The crazed individuals were quickly subdued, and the friends were rescued. As they sat outside in the warm summer night, watching the farmhouse burn to the ground, the friends knew they would never forget the horrors they had witnessed. They had stumbled upon something truly sinister and had barely escaped with their lives. But as they drove away, they couldn't help but wonder how many other abandoned farmhouses were there out there, hiding secrets and horrors beyond imagination. Sara and Tom had been driving for hours. and the sun was starting to set. They were in the middle of nowhere, on a dirt road that seemed to go on forever. As they rounded a bend, they saw a figure standing by the side of the road. It was a hitchhiker, holding up their thumb in the universal sign for a ride. Tom slowed the car down, and Sara looked at the hitchhiker. They were tall, with dark hair and a backpack slung over their shoulder. They looked harmless enough, and Sara nodded to Tom. He pulled over, and the hitchhiker climbed into the back seat. "Thanks," they said, flashing a smile at Sara and Tom. "I'm heading to the next town over. It's a bit of a walk from here." Sara and Tom introduced themselves, and they started chatting. The hitchhiker's name was Alex, and they had been traveling for weeks, backpacking through the country. They told Sara and Tom about their adventures and experiences, and the couple listened, fascinated. As the sky grew darker, Tom suggested they stop for the night. They had brought a tent and some sleeping bags, and they could camp out by the side of the road. Alex agreed, and they pulled over to a flat patch of ground. Sara and Tom set up the tent while Alex gathered some firewood. They made a small fire and sat around it, chatting and telling stories. As they talked, Sara noticed that Alex was getting increasingly agitated. They kept glancing over their shoulder, as if they were expecting something to jump out of the darkness. "Are you okay?" Sara asked, concerned. Alex shook their head. "I don't like it here," they said. "It feels wrong." Sara and Tom exchanged a worried look. They had noticed that the road was deserted, with no other cars passing by. They were completely alone, with only the fire for company. As they settled down to sleep, Sara and Tom heard Alex muttering to themselves. They couldn't make out the words, but they sounded like a prayer. It was then that they realized they had made a grave mistake by picking up the hitchhiker. They had no idea who Alex really was or what they were capable of. Sara and Tom tried to ignore Alex's strange behavior and fell asleep soon after. But in the middle of the night, Sara was jolted awake by a noise outside the tent. She sat up listening, but heard nothing else. She assumed it was an animal or the wind, and went back to sleep. The next morning, they woke up to find Alex gone. They searched the area, but there was no sign of them. Sara and Tom packed up their tent and drove off, relieved to be away from the deserted road. As they drove, they noticed that their car was acting strangely. It seemed to be struggling to maintain speed, and the engine was making odd noises. Sara and Tom were worried, but they pushed on, hoping to make it to the next town. Suddenly, the car jerked to a stop. They were in the middle of nowhere, with no cell service and no other cars in sight. They got out of the car and checked the engine, but they couldn't see anything obviously wrong. As they stood by the side of the road, they heard a noise behind them. They turned around to see Alex walking towards them, but they were different now. Something about them had changed. "Hey," they said, smiling at Sara and Tom. "You forgot something." They held up a small object. It was a charm that Sara had been wearing on a necklace. She had thought she had lost it, but here it was in Alex's hand. "How did you get that?" Sara asked, bewildered. Alex shrugged. "I found it lying around," they said. "It's important to you, isn't it?" Sara took the charm and thanked Alex, but as they got back into the car, she couldn't shake off the feeling that something was not right. Alex's strange behavior, the deserted road, the car breaking down, it all seemed too coincidental. As they drove, Sara noticed that Alex kept glancing over their shoulder, as if they were being followed. She mentioned it to Tom, who agreed that something was off, but they couldn't figure out what to do. They were in the middle of nowhere, with no one to turn to for help. Then they heard a loud bang. The car shook violently, and Sara and Tom knew that something had gone very wrong. They looked at each other in terror. They were trapped on the deserted road with a dangerous and unstable individual, and they had no way out. Sara and Tom got out of the car to inspect the damage, but they couldn't see anything wrong. It was then that Alex spoke up. "I can fix it," they said, their voice laced with an unsettling calmness. Sara and Tom exchanged a glance, unsure of what to do. But they were desperate to get moving again, and they didn't see any other options. So they watched as Alex tinkered with the engine, their movements deft and sure. It wasn't long before the car roared back to life. Sara and Tom were relieved, but also deeply unnerved. Alex seemed to know exactly what they were doing, as if they had done it 1,000 times before, and yet they had claimed to be a backpacker, traveling across the country. As they drove, Sara couldn't help but feel that Alex was leading them somewhere. They were no longer on the dirt road, but on a narrow path that wound through the trees. It was getting darker and darker, and Sara couldn't shake off the feeling that they were heading towards something ominous. Suddenly, the car jerked to a stop again. This time, Sara and Tom could see that something was very wrong. The wheels were stuck in a muddy pit, and the car wasn't going anywhere. Sara and Tom got out of the car, their hearts racing. They turned to Alex, who was sitting in the back seat, looking out of the window. "What's going on?" Sara asked, her voice trembling. Alex turned to them, and for the first time, Sara saw a glint of madness in their eyes. "We're here," they said, and Sara knew that they were in grave danger. Alex got out of the car, and Sara and Tom realized that they were trapped. They were on a deserted road in the middle of nowhere with a dangerous and unstable individual. They had no way to call for help and no way to escape. Sara and Tom huddled together, trying to figure out a plan, but they knew that there was no way out. They had made a grave mistake by picking up the hitchhiker, and now they were paying the price. As they waited for the inevitable, Sara and Tom heard a noise behind them. They turned around to see Alex standing there, holding a knife. "You should have never picked me up," they said, their voice cold and menacing. And with that, they lunged towards Sara and Tom, plunging the knife into the darkness. The Hitchhiker, Part 4, Final. Sara and Tom dodged out of the way just in time, but Alex was quick. They continued to swing the knife wildly, their movements becoming more erratic with each passing second. Sara and Tom backed away slowly, trying to find a way to escape, but they were backed up against the car, with nowhere to go. As Alex came at them again, Sara grabbed a nearby branch and swung it at them. It connected with their head, and Alex stumbled backwards, dazed. Taking advantage of the moment, Sara and Tom sprinted towards the trees, hoping to find a way out. But Alex was hot on their heels, the knife glinting in the darkness. They ran as fast as they could, their hearts pounding in their chests, but they could hear Alex's footsteps closing in on them, and they knew that they were running out of time. Just as they thought they were done for, they saw a light in the distance. They sprinted towards it, their legs burning with exhaustion. As they got closer, they saw that it was a farmhouse. They pounded on the door, begging for help. The farmer who lived there answered, and Sara and Tom collapsed into his arms. The farmer called the police, and they arrived within minutes. Alex was arrested and taken away, and Sara and Tom were taken to the hospital for treatment. As they lay in their hospital beds, Sara and Tom realized that they had been lucky to escape with their lives. They had made a grave mistake by picking up the hitchhiker, but they had also shown remarkable resilience in the face of danger. They vowed never to make the same mistake again, and to always trust their instincts. And as they lay there, surrounded by loved ones, they knew that they had survived a nightmare that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The group of travelers had been on the road for days, driving through the countryside with no particular destination in mind. As the sun began to set on the horizon, they found themselves on a narrow dirt road that led off the main highway. The road seemed to go on forever, with no end in sight. After a while, they came across a small community that was nestled in a clearing in the woods. The community appeared to be peaceful, with small wooden houses and neatly tended gardens. They decided to stop and rest there for the night. As they approached the village, they were greeted by a friendly old man who introduced himself as a village elder. He welcomed them warmly and offered them a place to stay for the night. The travelers were relieved and grateful for the hospitality, and they eagerly accepted the offer. The elder led them to a large wooden house in the center of the village. The house was warm and inviting, with a large fireplace and comfortable furniture. The travelers settled in and enjoyed a warm meal that was provided to them by the villagers. As the night wore on, the travelers began to notice strange things happening around them. They heard whispers in the hallways and saw shadowy figures moving in the darkness outside. They tried to ignore it, but the feeling of unease continued to grow. Finally, they decided to investigate the source of the strange noises. They found a secret door in the basement that led to a hidden room. In the room, they found a disturbing sight. A group of villagers dressed in dark robes gathered around a mysterious object that was emitting an eerie glow. The travelers realized that they had stumbled upon a cult that was dedicated to a dark and disturbing ritual. They knew that they had to escape before it was too late, but as they tried to leave, they found that the cult had other plans for them. The cultists had discovered the travelers' plan to escape, and they were not pleased. They had been preparing for this ritual for months, and they were not about to let anyone interfere with their plans. The travelers were quickly overpowered by the cultists and were dragged back to the hidden room. They were tied up and forced to watch as the cultists began their ritual. The ritual was like nothing the travelers had ever seen before. The cultists chanted in an ancient language as they performed dark and twisted acts. The object at the center of the room began to pulse with an eerie light, and the air became thick with an oppressive energy. As the ritual reached its climax, the travelers felt a wave of terror wash over them. They knew that they were in grave danger, and that their only hope for survival was to escape. In a moment of desperation, one of the travelers managed to break free from their bonds. They quickly untied the others, and they made a mad dash for the secret door. The cultists were in hot pursuit, and the travelers could hear their manic laughter echoing through the halls as they fled. But they were determined to make it out alive, no matter the cost. As they emerged from the secret room, they found themselves face to face with the village elder. The elder's friendly demeanor had been replaced by a cold, calculating gaze, and they realized that he had been in on the cult's plans all along. The travelers fought tooth and nail against the elder and the cultists, but they were vastly outnumbered. In the end, they were captured and brought back to the hidden room, where the cultists prepared to sacrifice them to their dark deity. As they lay tied up, waiting for their fate, the travelers could feel the weight of despair settling in. They had come so close to escaping, only to be caught in the end. But then something unexpected happened. The object at the center of the room began to crack and crumble, sending shards of light in all directions. The cultists screamed and recoiled in terror as the object exploded, consuming them in a burst of otherworldly energy. The travelers were left alone in the aftermath, surrounded by the smoking ruins of the cult's ritual chamber. They realized that they had been lucky to escape with their lives, but they also knew that they would never forget the horrors they had witnessed. As they made their way back to the road, they looked back at the peaceful village and wondered how many other unsuspecting travelers had met a similar fate at the hands of the cult. They vowed to never let their guard down again and to always be wary of the darkness that lurks in the world. It was supposed to be a fun weekend getaway. 5 friends piled into a beat-up old van and hit the road. They had no real destination in mind, just a vague plan to explore some of the back roads of the countryside. The sun was high in the sky as they turned off the main highway onto a deserted dirt road. The van bounced along the uneven terrain, kicking up dust and gravel. At first, the friends laughed and joked, enjoying the freedom of the open road. But as they made their way deeper into the remote countryside, the mood began to shift. The air grew still and heavy, and the landscape around them seemed to close in. Trees leaned in from either side of the road, their branches clawing at the sky like bony fingers. The dirt road twisted and turned, leading them deeper and deeper into the wilderness. The van's headlights illuminated nothing but darkness and shadows. As they rounded a bend, they saw a figure standing in the middle of the road ahead. The figure was tall and thin, with long hair that whipped in the wind. They couldn't make out any features, but the sight was unsettling nonetheless. The driver slowed the van to a stop, and they all peered out the window. The figure didn't move or react, just stood there like a statue. "Hey, maybe they need help," one of the friends suggested. But as they opened the van door, the figure suddenly bolted into the woods, disappearing from sight. The friends exchanged nervous glances and climbed back into the van. They continued down the dark, twisting road, each of them lost in their own thoughts. They didn't have to wait long for the next strange occurrence. As they rounded another bend, they saw a car parked haphazardly in the middle of the road, blocking their path. The driver honked the horn, but there was no response. They got out of the van and tried to move the car, but it was too heavy. Just as they were about to give up and turn back, they heard a sound coming from the woods. It was a low growl, like an animal but much deeper. They all froze, staring into the darkness, and then they saw it, 2 glowing eyes staring back at them. The friends screamed and ran back to the van, scrambling to get inside. The driver floored the gas pedal, and the van lurched forward, narrowly missing the abandoned car. As they sped away, the friends looked back, trying to catch a glimpse of a creature in the darkness. But all they saw was the empty road stretching out behind them, swallowed up by the night. The friends were shaken by the encounter with the strange creature. They tried to brush it off as just their imagination playing tricks on them, but the tension in the van was palpable. They drove on in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The road seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning through the dark, foreboding countryside. Eventually, they came across a small town, barely visible in the distance. It was the first sign of civilization they had seen in hours. As they got closer, they could see that something was off. The town was deserted, with no signs of life anywhere. The friends parked the van and got out, exploring the empty streets. It was like a ghost town, with no sounds except for the creaking of old buildings in the wind. As they made their way down one street, they heard a sound coming from a nearby alley. It was a scraping sound, like something being dragged across the pavement. They cautiously approached, and then they saw it, a figure hunched over a pile of garbage bags, rifling through them. The figure turned to look at them, and they saw that it was a woman. She was dirty and disheveled, with wild eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. "Can we help you?" one of the friends asked. The woman just stared at them for a moment, and then she lunged forward, screaming. The friends scattered, running back to the van as fast as they could. The woman pursued them, her screams echoing through the deserted town. They all piled into the van and sped away, leaving the town behind. But the image of the woman's wild eyes stayed with them, haunting them long after they were gone. As they drove deeper into the countryside, they began to realize that something was seriously wrong. Everywhere they went, they encountered strange occurrences and unsettling individuals. They tried to stay calm, to reassure each other that it was all just a coincidence. But deep down, they knew that something was stalking them, something that meant them harm. The tension in the van was unbearable, and the friends began to turn on each other. Accusations and recriminations flew back and forth as they struggled to make sense of what was happening. And then, just as they were about to reach their breaking point, they saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the road, blocking their path. This time, there was no mistaking it. The figure was humanoid, but distorted and twisted, like something out of a nightmare. The driver slammed on the brakes, and the van screeched to a halt. The figure didn't move, just stood there, watching them with cold, unfeeling eyes. The friends knew that they were in grave danger. They had no idea what the figure wanted, but they knew that it couldn't be anything good. And then, just as they were about to give up hope, they saw a glimmer of light in the distance. It was the first sign of hope they had seen in hours. They drove toward the light, the figure still standing in the road behind them. They didn't know what was waiting for them, but they knew that it had to be better than what they were leaving behind.